David McKee's long and influential career has included the writing and illustration of some of our best-known children's picture books, including Not Now Bernard, The Conquerors, and the hugely successful series featuring Elmer the Elephant, to name but a few. His animation work includes the creation of the popular 1970s children's BBC series Mr. Ben, and also the King Rollo films. His first book, Toucan Toucan, was published in 1964 by Klaus Flug, the founder of the publishers Anderson Press, who still publish many of his works today. In 2006, he was the UK nominee for the biennial International Hans Christian Andersen Award for his contribution as children's illustrator. David spoke recently to Nikki Gamble about his amazing career and began by telling her about his early artistic influences.
When I was at art college, it was the fauves that influenced me terrifically, all the colour, and Matisse Durand, Flamenc and Dufy, all the group. But it was just that purity of colour.
Right. What's the distinctiveness between British drawing and the French that you were inspired by?
I just think it was probably a looser, more painterly approach for a lot of stuff. The first version of Elmer is much more painterly than the second one.
Hopefully we can have a bit of a historical tour talking about Elmer and the other books. I wanted to start, if you don't mind, I know it's a long way back, but Toucan Toucan,
yeah.
That was the first, I understand, that made it into print.
That was Klaus. He was with Abelard Schumann, and 64 it was published, so I would have first drawn it in probably 62, and I did a full colour version, and then he said he'd publish it, but I'd have to hand separate the colours. I mean, that was one of the interesting things, that explosion of colour printing at the time suddenly gave this freedom. So you got Michael Foreman and John Birmingham and Quentin, of course, and Brian Wildsmith, and they all were suddenly producing picture books, which were interesting. I think I was just happened to be there at a very lucky time when the shelves were empty, and parents hadn't seen books like it, so they were buying books for themselves, not just for their children. Now, all the shelves are full, and you think, another picture book, where would I put it?
1963, my dad came home with a copy of Where the Wild Things Are, and I thought he'd bought it for me. When I was 18 and I left home, he wouldn't let me take it with me. He'd really bought it for him.
Yeah.
But it was for us to share.
Yeah.
And that does bring me on to quite an important thing, I think, with your books. They, by and large, are not about childish interests. They're not about children's interests per se. They're about human interests delivered in a way that children can understand. And I think that's quite different from looking at, say, for instance, Shirley Hughes, wonderful, but her books are childish interest, being the last person through the door or whatever. Yours are more human ideas.
They're probably very influenced by the fact that I love the fables. I like that business of finding out suddenly, oh yeah, that's what that means. And then later actually being able to read it a different way and say, oh, it means that as well, And the fables, of course, weren't written for children anyway. And the parables in the Bible I also liked for the same reason. They don't have children as heroes or heroines, and animals are often used so you don't have a confusion about it.
Is it the moral that's the powerful thing, or is it the story that, delivered in that form, is so memorable that you can carry it around with you and you can recall it really easily because of the simplicity with which it's told?
I think also we as had an audience which was also an adult audience that you could talk to at the same time. And I like working for the adult that the child will be and the child that the adult still is. I like that kind of audience. And often the child understands better than the adult what's going on.
Yeah. the child in the adult in the child. I think a lot of your characters, rather than being children, are adults who are children. You've got your king in the Melrick stories. He's really a child, isn't he? We've got Mr. Ben, who, in spite of his bowler hat, is very childlike.
Yeah, naive perhaps.
Yeah.
I've probably never grown up myself. Really. That's part of the problem.
Here's to not growing up.
Yeah.
So coming to Elmer, which he's really 51, not 30, but seeing as we're celebrating 30 years, we'll pretend.
It's the 30 years of the Anderson version.
Anderson. So I know you've told this story before about why Elmer came about. 51 years or 30 years on, we still have those issues?
I think that story was magnified. I think the differences were there even without the personal. I said to the taxi driver this morning, something was said about history, and I said it's a pity we don't learn from it, you know. And also we just keep repeating the same, especially as far as war is concerned. You know, you can sense the unrest worldly at the moment. You know, when you look at the situation in each country, there seems to be a kind of chaos going on. It's not just the climate which is warming up. You know, something else is warming up.
But to write children's books like this, you must have, at your heart, you must feel optimistic.
Yes, of course. People are so fantastic. That's what's ridiculous, you know, is I was brought up during the war. I had an uncle in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, taught to hate the Japanese, hate the Germans. Klaus, who's a German, is my best friend. Yeah. Satoshi Kitamura is a very good friend, Japanese. You know, it's all just so silly, really.
You've written a number of books that have conflict at their heart. Tusk.
6 Men.
Even Two Monsters.
2 Monsters, yeah. 3 Monsters is immigration.
And The Conquerors. Which is an amazing book because it's still a fable of kinds, but it's not such a simple idea to grasp, is it? That idea of allowing yourself to be invaded or being passive in the face of aggression.
And also seeing afterwards, you know, that it's them that actually win. It's a culture that, you know, we did this silly thing in Iraq. They were breaking free of all the traditions and we drove them straight back into it. In fact, it was Iraq that, of course, produced the story. But the story originally came when I was at art college, and I went to art college first in 1950 or 51. And there were older students who'd just come back from the war and had been soldiers, sailors and airmen and things. And there was a technician there who'd actually gone up through Italy. In their way, he'd conquered Italy, so to speak, in pushing the Germans away. And all he could think about was getting back to Italy. He was just so impressed by it. And I thought, it's interesting because Italy won, not the other, and it was the culture. And the idea kept coming back, but when Iraq came, I suddenly thought I was furious, you know, that we could make the same mistake again. The only thing I could do was a book, of course. So the book had taken over 50 years.
Visually, it stands out from, you know, if you look at your books together, it stands out because of the lack of colour in it. That
was the way that felt right for the book. I've always done, you know, it's like the Mr. Ben books, the black and white and colour alternating pages, because it was cheaper to produce a book like that, 4 colours one side and just black and white the other. But I've always drawn a lot, so the emphasis was more on that way of drawing, which also made it more acceptable, I think.
Listening to you talk about yourself going to art college in the 1950s, did you have to do national service?
Yes.
Right, where did you do that?
Most of it I spent in Aldershot. It was about the time of the Suez War, I think. But I was already selling stuff to newspapers. I was furious about having to do national service because I was selling humorous cartoons to the newspapers. and that's what I continued to do during the army. I was, they'd ask you to produce. There was a certain sergeant major was. It must have been a birthday or some sort of anniversary, and they got me to draw a card for him. So you had to get the likeness and all that. And another one got married. It must have been from the cavalry because I put him on a donkey, quite large, which was cut out. And they were happy about all that kind of stuff. So it stood me in some sort of stead, I suppose. It was a popular way to be noticed.
Doing the cartoons for the newspaper, that's quite a pressurised thing, isn't it? Because you have to come up with things really quickly. And
it wasn't so political. The stuff I drew when I was drawing for the educational supplement, I had a weekly one that did depend on being current and making comment on it. But most of my stuff was just funny sort of situations or humorous situations. But what I would do is I would draw 10 cartoons, put them in an envelope, send them to the art editor, and then they'd send them all back again. And then I'd send them off to another newspaper, and then somebody would buy one. Right. So you'd have to make the 10 up with another drawing.
But lots of drawing. And at some point you got into television as well with the King Rollo films.
Well, Mr. Ben was before King Rollo. The BBC read a couple of books and showed the pictures, where they'd read it and turn the page and show the next illustration. And they actually approached me and asked if I was interested in doing a Watch for Mother series. At that point, I had 3 children, and we just bought a television, our first television. The Watch for Mother series at lunchtime was something I liked. And I had an idea which I offered them, but they didn't really like that. And then the first Mr. Ben book had been published in 1967, and we're talking 1969 now. And the second book was just about to come out, and they didn't like the second story where he was a prisoner. But they liked the idea, and they said, well, go write some stories and then we'll talk about it. And it just happened very casually, like that. And luckily I got involved with Clive Juster and Duncan Lamont for the music, Ray Brooks, who became a friend through doing The Voice. Fantastic. Ian Lawless, who worked with me. They were all such good people that it helped the Mr. Ben thing. After that, I made, again with Clive, we made some films for the Save the Children Fund. I think we made 5. I animated the first, and then we got Leo Beltoft-Nielsen, who's a fantastic animator, who animated the others. And at the end of that, the King Rollo books were about to come out, and I said, what about making some films of that? And we made a 5-minute film with our own money. I said, no good just talking the idea, we'll have to make a film. So we made the first film, and the BBC said yes, they would take the series of 13, and we just kept going then with following it with Towser and Victor and Maria, which I always loved, a very quiet series.
And you took some quite famous books, like Eric Hill's books, I think
Spot
we did animations
for
yours
and
as
Eric
well,
became a very good friend because of that. That was nice.
And were you trained in animation?
I knew the principles of animation, but most of it we did with camera movement, more than actual animation. I had no idea about animation really, hence the walk, the Ministry of Funny Walks walk of Mr. Ben outside the shop. And I guess I learned as we went along.
So some of those stories, they were obviously created for animation, and then when you did things like the Spot books, they'd obviously been books that you turned into
there
animation.
Was Spot was a mixture in that we started with the books and needed more stories, so I wrote some stories and I scripted all of them for some had to be adjusted for film, so I did that and storyboarded them.
Talking about working processes, the difference with creating a book is it's quite, at least in the beginning stages, it's quite a solitary act compared to making an animation or a film?
Yeah.
I know at some point other people come in to that
Yeah, I
process.
prefer the book.
Do you?
Yeah, it's more like a painting. It's you and it, and they sort of merge really. And when I'm working on a book now, another Elmer, in fact, and I work all the book virtually at the same time. So I can go from page 3 to page 9, and because for some reason or other, or I suddenly change something.
Big canvases?
Not that big. The biggest a couple of meters by a metre 20 or something like that.
So what sorts of things do you enjoy painting? And are you doing it principally for you, or as a...
Totally for me. Yeah, it's very much the pleasure of the paint. And I change the technique, or perhaps not a lot, but it's not just the same each time, because that's the way it is. That's what I like.
And just going back for a moment to this redrawn.
That's the redrawn
images, weren't
Yeah.
they? What I was interested in when I revisited this was how many connections I could see to work that came later. The bowler hat, that becomes a bit of a feature.
That's true, and I also used that in the Times, in the weekly series, the drawings that I did for the educational supplement. Yeah. That image of Mr. Everyman really is what I like, and it's quite. Magritte used a similar sort of image. Charlie Chaplin was that image, and Laurel and Hardy, my gods in a way. I think they are absolutely fantastic.
And of course, at that time, you could have still walked around London,
There was
and
quite
you would
a
have
lot.
seen bowler hats.
Perhaps they'll come back. They are nice sort of images, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
So there was that kind of resonated, and then this looks like a hill that I recognise from The Hill and the Rock.
It's interesting because I was brought up the first 15 years virtually in Tavistock in Devon, and on the edge of the moor there's part of our walk would take us there to the Pimple, which is it's like a water tower, and it looks like a small version of the Hill and the Rock, and I never realised it until I went back there one day, and I suddenly thought, perhaps that's why I did the Hill and the Rock, because of that.
It's imprinted somewhere on your eyeballs, isn't it? From seeing it.
It's the same as the names of people. I suddenly realised they were all names of families that lived around us when I was being brought up.
So, of all the many books that you've done, and there are a lot, which has given you the greatest pleasure?
That's like saying which of your children do you prefer. They've all got something, I suppose, important. And books are important for different things. Obviously, Not Now Bernard had quite an impact, and this still seems to be, luckily, important for some things. But Charlotte's Piggy Bank is a completely different kind of book. And all the in-reading and in the stories in that I like as well. I obviously like the early Mr. Benns. Different ones for different reasons. I like this Denver as well.
Yeah, now this one initiates so much discussion.
I mean, I quite like provoking discussion, and I think they're books that help teachers, to provoke and talk about certain subjects. And Denver is on this subject of money and so on. I like that one as well, even though certain people don't like it and find it very...
What do you think people feel uncomfortable about?
Well, the fact that it feels for them that the villagers don't have the right to all their things, which of course they have the right. We have the right to do that, but there's a price to pay. But certain people, in any case, will always, like Denver, always turn out all right, rich and all that, even though he did what they wanted and split his money up. But in the systems that we criticise, like it was the old Lord of the Manor and that kind of thing, and my parents both worked in service, and I know that they didn't feel like they were slaves or anything like that. They were. I think they felt that they were well treated, and also they they saw a side of life which they would never have seen otherwise.
I suppose the difficulty is that there could have been other people working in service for a different kind of Lord of the Manor, and that experience would have been
I think, that's important.
Different.
I think that each time you have to take, is this just another villain, or is he actually okay? And quite a lot of them are, a lot of people are okay, I think.
He's an artist like you.
Yeah.
And maybe that's
like
more
me.
important, is that he does something positive with his life. Is that more important than the money aspect? I mean, these are things that we talk about with the children.
Yes. So sometimes I don't know the answers of questions that I pose, but I remember that the house that we rented in Tavistock, the landowner was somebody quite important, and at Christmas he would dress up as Father Christmas and go around and be nice to people. And that comes up a bit in this, because Denver plays his Father Christmas a bit. He does the prize giving and all that kind of stuff, and then it's in a way it's a chore for him, but he's glad to get rid of it and just go off and paint, do all he's ever wanted to do. So everybody loses their role in this one, I think.
And there's the stranger.
Yeah.
Who comes whispering.
Well, that's it. I think there's often the voice of doom a bit. People get into things, and sometimes you can leave things alone as well, I think.
And sometimes that voice is from within your own head.
Are we? Yeah. Pardon.
That's good.
That's right.
Elmer's Elmer. Back to Elmer again. I know we're darting about from book to book, but Elmer has grown into what an extended family he has now. He's got uncles and grandparents.
A lot of those come out of my family as well. His cousin Wilbur.
I think he was the first to appear.
He was
wasn't
the first, yes, and that was because of an uncle of mine who was a ventriloquist, and it was nice to go for a walk with him, and suddenly somebody would call to him from a house, "Oh, Harold," and he'd say, "Oh, it must be John, you know. Where is he then? Did you see where he was?" I said, "Oh, no, it came from over there, Uncle, you know." And he said, "Oh, where are you, John?" "Oh, here, Harold," you know, and the voice would come back, and it was fun, you know, and I made me think it'd be nice if Elmer had somebody go for a walk with like that. And then once I had the idea, I said, "But what does he look like? His family, he'd be different as well." So I made him black and white, and that was the beginning. And the Eldo was based on an African ring that I've got. I can't actually find it at the moment, which is a bit annoying. And it's a large ring. It's like having a small sculpture on your finger, and somebody of importance or dignity would wear it like that, with the holding it up to show it. And it's this golden elephant, decorated rather like Eldo is.
Wow.
And Eldo, of course, is short for El Dorado.
Yes.
Golden.
Yes.
As well as being like elephant, like Elmer, and Zelda's got the L. And Zelda came up mostly because of my mother, who, as a lot of us do when we get older, get deaf, and she would reply to a question or a statement, which suddenly became a question, with an answer which was totally unreasonable, you know. You'd wonder what earth she'd heard, so everybody would laugh. And the colours that I used were the colours my mother liked to wear as well. So
she's purpley colour, is she?
Yeah, she's lilac and blue sort of colours. And Super L came up because my grandsons were dressing up as Superman or whatever, and the costume had to be right. If it wasn't right, they couldn't be seen, you know. So I thought it'd be quite nice. But in the end, they are my grandsons, obviously, you know. I thought Super L should also be super.
So gradually the older generation is giving way to stories about the younger generation coming through into the Elmer family.
Well, yeah, I think they're just stories that Elmer tells me, and says, "I ever tell you the time, David, about when we went for a walk in the jungle where we'd never been before?" I said, "Don't know, Elmer, what happened? Tell me again, and we'll see."
Yeah, because after 30 years, that character must just feel so present and real.
Well, when I revisit him for a story, it's not like other stories that some of them with Elmer too just come out of the air, but it's a bit different visiting friends. It's quite nice. That's one of the nice things about a series. The Melrick, the Magician, and King Rollo, and other series like that. I enjoy that, revisiting them and seeing what's going on next. Yeah.
And is it your son that you've done books with?
Yeah, I did one book with the son who lives in France, and Brett has done more. He's written some other stuff, long stuff too, which is interesting. It was music before, but it's much more difficult for them to earn a living.
A little bit like writers and illustrators who have to make their living by going into schools, because to live by illustration alone is very difficult.
Well, for anybody, I probably couldn't make it now, because if I was starting, I think I'd be in a bit lost. But I think that if you're doing picture books, you have to do it because that's what you want to do, and not with any thought of earning your living or becoming rich. I managed to earn my living, but I've always done other stuff as well. A group of us were in Brazil. Somebody from Spain, somebody from Italy, Max Veldhuis from Holland, who was a good friend of mine. And Max and I were doing a talk with quite a big group of illustrators, and somebody asked us, how many books a year do you do? And I said, usually 2, sometimes 3. And Max said 1. He said, sometimes 2. He said, and they said, well, how do you manage to make a living from that? And neither of us had ever thought of making a living from that. We made our living from doing graphic work or working for the press or all the rest of it. A picture book's something special as far as I'm concerned, and you do it not to make a living out of it. If you're lucky enough to make a living out of it, which now I am lucky enough, then fantastic. But it's not that easy.
Do you ever run out of ideas?
Touch wood. No, I've got a few stories written which I'll never get around to, and ideas keep coming when in unexpected sort of moments. Also, there are just stories everywhere. I think it's also like ideas for cartoons, but I think music and stories are in the air. And we have to be receivers, and then it's for the television, and there's a television receiver, and if you tune the receiver, you get that which is in this room with us. That frightens me to think of all those telephone conversations that are in the room, and if the right receiver's here, you can hear them, and the same with all the radio programs, all the television programs, all that, and music is there as well, and stories are there, and we have to be a receiver. Just let them come.
That's brilliant. David, I want to thank you so much for talking to me. I've wanted to talk to you about your books for a long time. I'm a great admirer of your work, so thank you so much.
You're very kind. Thank you, Nikki.
Thanks for listening to In the Reading Corner with Just Imagine. If you've enjoyed this podcast, you can find many more on the podcast section of our website, justimagine.co.uk, plus via iTunes or your usual podcast provider. Don't forget to pass the pod and recommend this fantastic free resource to your friends and colleagues. Just Imagine also has a free fortnightly newsletter packed full of the latest news, CPD training, reviews and giveaways. To sign up, visit justimagine.co.uk/newsletter.